Welcome back again. Over the last 3 months, I've summarized my playthrough of E2E starting all the way back in November of 2021, and in that time I was able to build this massive base housing my first auto-crafting system and a fusion reactor running off of infinite deuterium produced by these pumps. I also made this small sieving setup to make 4 ore every second. If you haven't seen the other parts, I will link them in the description. At the end of the last video, I got the creative mana pool, beginning a new stage of progression and putting me into the endgame. But first, the elephant in the room. I have a new character here, all thanks to Stray. Meet him on my Discord server. Now I can finally get rid of this annoying usage of my Minecraft skin or my old profile picture, and finally I can do this. So after getting the mana pool, I went on a break for a while and played some other mods like Nomi Factory and a beta version of the competitive server, coming this April, and I learned a lot about automating and progressing quickly. When I came back to E2E, I completely revamped most of my setups to automate them better, and also did things like expanding the fusion reactor and giving it real coolant instead of water. But once I got back to looking at the mana pool, I realized that I could use a conjuration catalyst under the mana pool to double all of these items using mana, and now I have infinite mana. So I put the mana pool in a box and threw some glowstone in there, then closed it and waited. Well, damn. Okay, we're back. This time let's try a more stable system. Oh, that actually worked. Ah! I'm back again. So what happened was I completely messed up my stabilization, allowing the glowstone to double every second, and in just a minute I had created 85,000 glowstone entities with that many particle effects for my, at the time, shit computer to render, and it took 10 minutes before my computer was able to close E2E. So I moved the mana pool into this vertical tunnel and manually sent the glowstone into storage using a magnet card on my new wireless storage access. Now that I have a mana pool, I could look towards getting 64 anglesite to make sure I would never have to make it again. Since I have almost all of the machines in the game, getting this wasn't that hard except for these 3 materials. All 3 of them are found on other planets, with energized clathrate found on these 4 planets, resonant clathrate on these 4, and destabilized clathrate on all 5 of these planets. To keep things easy, I decided to stick to planets in our solar system, and I was going to start with the planets that have titanium. But first I need some method of going interplanetary, so I was going to get a material called dilithium from the moon to power a warp drive, and before that, I actually need to go into space, so it's time to build a rocket. For this, I needed one new machine, a rolling machine with lubricant to make sheets, so it was time to get oil. I ended up drilling the entire area around my base with a drilling rig and a battery to get core samples, but there was no oil. So then I of course switched back to my good friend, the laser drill, that I should have made a lot earlier. Oil can come from oil shale, which is one of the many materials mined in the laser drill that can be easily turned into lots of crude oil. Once I had that steady source of oil, I made this distillation tower for lubricant, gasoline, and diesel, which is very oversimplified. Since I'm a GregTech player, I could explain exactly how oil distillation works, and what products it gives and how we make all of these synthetics out of them, but I don't want to. Another cool byproduct of my oil production and distillation is bitumen and tar, which also just so happen to be the 2 things I need for rocket fuel in this mixer, and of course we have the lubricant for sheet metal, which I use for the fuel tanks. With all this and many auto-crafted materials, I now have a rocket, 2 fueling stations, a tank brimming with rocket fuel, a rocket assembling machine, and a guidance computer with a course set for the moon. And now it's time for liftoff.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Once I landed on the moon, I used my new draconic staff of power to mine 5 stacks of dilithium and immediately teleported back to the base because at this point, of course I can teleport interdimensionally. I used the dilithium to build a space station with space for teleporters to all the planets I go to, and a warp drive to go interplanetary. Once in space, I put a stack of dilithium into the warp drive and warped to Europa first. Then I needed to go to the 2 other planets and grab their respective ores. Once I got back, I put all the materials together and made andesite and made an infinite storage access with it. Before I begin working on the creative tank, let's do a factory building speed round. Pressurizer autocrafting, gear autocrafting, mechanism alloy autocrafting, singularity factory, boron nitride factory, zirconium automation, XP automation, a massive garden cloche line constantly growing all of these materials, and finally, another fusion reactor. Except this time it's 2 sizes bigger and more organized. With my factory well and truly fleshed out, it was time to burn the next 2 months for creative items. I say it's time to work on creative items, but in reality I knew that half the materials were things like titanium and Certus quartz, which I could not possibly get in a large enough quantity for some of the recipes ahead. So to fix this, I consulted what I stupidly thought was the source of all E2E knowledge. I go by lots of names, and in his video he mentioned a dimension builder he used to make infinite materials. Sounds like a great idea, let's make some dimensions. How could anything go wrong? This recipe was fairly easy. No huge crafting grids, the materials were almost childish to get, and in reality, getting all 3 of these machines is a matter of being able to get this, the Infinity Catalyst, which probably should have made me just turn around and try for the creative tank, but I didn't. So I began work on the Infinity Catalyst, with the main part being the singularities. If you've watched my other content, you know how painful singularities are. The difference is, I don't need 13 of every singularity, and I'm not making the ultimate singularity, so we only need these 27 singularities, which I did in a terrible method. I was so dead set on resource conservation that I only made 1 quantum compressor with drawers attached to get just over 10,000 items in it, which would come from storage. To make a singularity, you need 10,000 of either an ingot or a block, depending on the material, in the quantum compressor, which takes a long time to make each singularity. So once I had all that in place, I got it to import iron and then started upgrading ore production. I got this huge new sieve set up since the temporary one from before wasn't that expandable, and I had a lot of bottlenecks. And you may be wondering why I put so many pipes over it, and that's because I decided to ask my model literate friend how I could fix the design, and he said more pipes, so I added more pipes. Now the other part of ore processing. Ore doubling had to be upgraded because this simple sag mill was just too slow for anything, and my enrichment setup is working at a disappointing 7 items a second. So to make this faster, I automated the best capacitors in the game at the time, and put them into an industrial sag mill to triple its speed, and once I had it in place, I was doubling ores at a blistering 60 dust a second, so fast that I would take a stack of iron, instantly crush it all and eject it from the machine, and then wait, since autocrafting can't even input that fast. Now I need to smelt all that dust, so I made an alloy smelter with upgrades that smelted even faster than the mill could crush, which meant that crafting would look like this. In the time I spent upgrading ore processing, I was also switching singularities and occasionally made more than I needed to save for later, and made almost every singularity I needed except for some very special singularities, most notable of which was the flux crystal singularity, which when I break it down requires 40,000 redstone and 10,000 diamonds, which was clinically insane for me to do at the time, especially if you count the 90,000 redstone needed in the redstone singularity. So this meant making some stupid auto-crafting arrays that I think were only used for this and needed lots of babysitting because it didn't actually work. To skip the pain, it took me 3 days of editing ore processing and making singularities for me to finally make this recipe. Now you may be asking, why didn't you mention the other stuff in the recipe? Firstly, this is my channel, don't ask me to tell you anything. Secondly, it was childishly easy, and all of these combined were less difficult than a single singularity. Now I needed to make more draconic cores, again, and then just 15 minutes of crafting to get all this stuff, which is quite a bit easier than the Infinity Catalyst. With it and these 3 machines, I made my first dimension. I made it of the finest material my base could produce, the basis of all late game progress, spruce logs. After that I made a flux crystal dimension, which did take a while since making these needs over 1,000 of the block you want in the dimension, so I had to make even more flux crystals in this terrible setup until I made the dimension. Once I went in, it seemed pretty safe, so I went mining. While mining an inventory full of crystals, this happened. I instantly died because the dimension ran out of power, collapsed, and killed me with all my stuff in that dimension. Now I had to fix this, but the problem was, this was the largest setback in my entire playthrough. I was now stuck in a corner surrounded by fusion reactor machinery with cables going absolutely everywhere. I had forgotten that I even had a bed here, and more importantly, when I tried flying over to storage... How the hell do I get to storage now? Even worse, no wireless storage. I felt absolutely crippled. Once I got to storage by bridging with cobblestone, I started to plan. I knew I had to get that stuff back, but I needed power to my dimension builder. To do so, I turned to the only good power generation I knew. It was time to build another fusion reactor. For this I made a new sieving setup for netherrack to get boron and lithium, and then I spent a day building this fusion reactor in a much nicer location, only to learn that this power generation wasn't enough, so I built 2 more. Once I stabilized fusion fuel production, I went into the dimension and retrieved my stuff. You'd probably think I'd learned from my mistakes and not use dimensions again, but if you watched my other 2 videos, you know that that's not true, since this makes up half the deaths in the playthrough and 90% of late game deaths. So now we're going to look back to the creative tank. Right now I'm not going to worry about all the liquids at the edges here, and instead I'm going to get the cell frames and the cores in the middle. To get this specific core, the chaotic core, I needed to fight the Chaos Guardian. Now try to point on this map in the end where the Chaos Guardian would be. If you made a guess anywhere on the screen, you're wrong, and you should feel bad. The Chaos Guardian is actually, move the screen, farther, farther, keep going, here, all the way at Z negative 10,000. This and the fact that it is by far the hardest fight I would ever face in modded Minecraft meant that I would have to make some armor upgrades to go that far and fight it. So I got together absolutely all of my Draconic Evolution capabilities to upgrade all of my Draconic armor, and since Wyvern cores are way too hard to make, I only upgraded things to tier 1, but some are upgraded to tier 2 with Wyvern cores so that my energy shield had a combined strength of 2048 health, with a fast regenerating primary shield of over 200 HP. In short, I had really good armor, and I could also fly at unholy speeds, making the 10,000 block journey just a short walk around the corner. Once I got there, I set some teleporters to the area for the many deaths coming, and flew straight into the fight. Once the fight was over, I ran to the middle and grabbed the Chaos Crystals and teleported back before the island exploded. Since I had already made the Draconic cores required, making this one Chaotic core was fairly easy. The next major part in the creative tank was the resonant cell frames. These are used in every important creative recipe, so I'm going to make all the cell frames at once, much like the Anglesite. The hard part of making these is upgrading the empty cell frame to a filled cell, with this huge recipe, which is not only the largest combination crafter I will ever use, but it's also using things like the structure frame. But also there are other chores like this moonstone, which either needs some really refined lapis or an extremely rare ore. Or you could look at the Lapitron crystal, which actually can't be auto-crafted since storage doesn't recognize it or its component as real, and then says that it's waiting for a recipe. Another really annoying part is pulsating mesh, which needs this really weird stuff requiring bees from space and dragon eggs. It's a whole process like that for half of these, but eventually I pulled it off, and at the end of the week I was sitting with a nice 36 resonant cell frames. Now I had one last job, which was getting all of these demonically gargantuan drums, which I must add is an actually amazing name, and I even got one gifted to me from the quest that was filled to the brim, all 21 million buckets, with lube. So I began writing many auto-crafting recipes for these drums that ended up taking way more resources than initially expected, and became the second most expensive part of this labyrinth of a crafting recipe. Finally, the many buckets of every fluid in the game. I'll probably show all liquids on screen right now for the people who actually care about that, but to give you the breakdown: ethanol, put stacks of carrots in these melters and distill it. UU matter, take from the tank that now has over 800 buckets of the stuff. Corium, build a new fission reactor and purposefully melt it down. Essence, I just used an ore dictionary converter on my liquid XP. Empowered canola oil, squeeze canola into oil, then distill it, then laser canola seeds and put them in the canola oil to get crystallized oil, then empower the crystallized seeds and throw them in. You can't make this up. With all that done, I had taken my entire morning away, and finally crafted the creative fluid tank. Once I made the creative fluid tank, I took a break and began planning the next couple of hours. Before I did this, I finally had the motivation and time to start YouTube, and I also realized that I didn't need to use my microwave pickle of a headset mic if I'm not making a commentary video. So I worked a week making my base tour video with absolutely no editing experience, and it did as good as I expected. What, did you think I'm stupid? That's my only video I've ever posted, and how did it even get more than... The thing was even included in a Regan video. Well, now I probably have to progress on E2E, don't I? So once I released that video, I decided to progress in E2E, still without recording, since at the time the video only had 80 views and I didn't want to make a video without a new mic. So back to progression. Once I got back on, I made these three setups for filling Enderium tanks with duplicated fluids from the creative fluid tank, and made thousands of ingots. Once I had this set up, I began work on other useful creative items. The creative capacitor bank and the creative EU generator could be done at the same time, because all of these items they have in common, and the thing is, in my break, I played GregTech for the first time, and now all these items were trivial to get around. Just autocraft it, and if it's too slow, autocraft harder. In this return, I added almost 200 new autocrafting patterns, doubled the speed of 10 factories, and most importantly now, automated the high-power solar panel. Because of all this speed crafting, I made the creative EU generator and capacitor bank on the same day, and started using them in my base, especially with high-power solar power automation, which needs really high-speed machines to run, so I need a lot of power. Then the actually difficult creative item comes in, the creative gas tank. All that matters in this entire recipe is just these two items in the middle because I have everything else. The creative fluid tank is pretty obvious how it's difficult. The creative gas tank frame is arguably as bad because I need the 512 buckets of these 9 gases / chemicals, so I made another factory, 2 other factories to generalize the production of half of these chemicals, and then decondense my way to the others. But once I had that, it was easy to finish the creative gas tank, being the last major creative item in the creative vending upgrade, so I can finally move on to the final collection. Except I don't have to work another week on editing that, since I already did on this video. In case you couldn't tell by the fact that I'm talking to you without sounding like this, I got a new mic, so that meant I could finally really begin YouTube. And so I made these two videos that explain the end of my playthrough in even more detail than what I'm currently doing. But if you don't want to listen to my first two videos, I will give you a summary here. Since I needed so many materials for the 14 of every singularity, I made 20 ingot formers with infinite molten metal being cooled in them, and then spent a full day making 20 quantum compressors to maximize singularity production, and at the end of the first video I got close to making the tier 6 solar array controller. Then I needed a ton of diamonds and emeralds, so I prepared the blocks for those two dimensions, and died instantly since I was using more than the integer limit of power, and the dimension would run out of power every 20 seconds, or every 2 seconds if you're running at the FPS of switching dimensions. Then I cheated my stuff back because it was physically impossible to get it back otherwise, and I didn't want to remake all that armor. So I made another dimension out of Certus quartz just 3 days later, and learned that efficiency upgrades exist, so I spent half of my net worth on those just to get the Certus quartz. After that I made a redstone dimension, and a better stable creative mana pool reactor, to make glowstone and some extra redstone. Finally, I grinded for 3 days for 15 of every singularity to get the infinity ingot. And now I had all the components I needed, and finally, after 430 hours, I assembled the creative vending upgrade. Would I recommend this pack? Well, actually yes. Its progression line is pretty easy to get your head around if you know what you're doing. My advice for you is, if you're starting out as a modded player, is to maybe play a kitchen sink pack like E2, all the mods, or you could do what I do and try Sky Factory first. And if you want to go big, E2E or Pansmith's better version E2EU is next. You could just jump to them immediately though. You should target ore generation and auto crafting because once you have infinite resources and the means to quickly refine them, you can win pretty easily. Now that E2E is done, I feel like I could take on any challenge. Except for that one. But now E2E mixed with the briefly mentioned Greg technology at the end, I feel like I want to put my skills to the test. No, not you again. I've mentioned Chaos Tech a couple times, and if you're interested, the link to my Discord server is in the description. And to help with all this, I don't want to be that guy, but I spent 6 months making these videos, and the crafting animations seen in all parts were a huge undertaking to make, so I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to get this channel shown to more people.